The crystal sanctum was quiet, a hollow quiet that felt like the universe holding its breath. Prelate Violaire's thin, four-fingered hands rested on the smooth prayer stone. Around them, the last of their people huddled. The Selenians looked like beings made of twilight and glass, their skin soft and glowing with faint internal light. Now, that light was dim with fear. The sounds from outside the sanctum's crystalline walls were not quiet. They were the distant shrieks of crawl plasma cutters, the rumble of collapsing spires, and the terrible, final silence that followed the screams of the dying. The craw had come like a blight. They were not conquerors. They were consumers. They stripped worlds, taking all organic matter, leaving behind only dust and bones. The Selenians had no weapons to fight them. Their science was for growth and harmony. Their art was light and sound. Their faith was in the great harmony, the belief that the universe was filled with benevolent, higher beings. In their oldest stories, these beings were angels of light and peace, who would arrive in moments of ultimate despair to save the faithful. Prelate Violaire closed their large, dark eyes. Despair was here. The craw siege lines tightened every hour. The last defense grid had failed at dawn. This was the end. With a final soft sigh that was almost a sob, Valar activated the sanctum's ancient beacon. It was not a military signal. It was a prayer. A desperate, repeating pulse of light and music and sorrow, cast out into the endless dark of space. It showed the beauty of their world. It showed the brutality of the craw. It was a plea sent to anyone, to anything that might be listening. We are here, it cried in 1,000 forms of data. We are ending. Please, if you have light, bring it to us now. The signal tore through the void, a ripple of distress in the cosmic sea. It washed over antennas and sensors on many ships, most of which ignored it. War was common. Death was routine. But one ship, on the farthest patrol edge of United Earth space, caught the broadcast. On the bridge of the UEV Zhongjin, the signal played. Captain Lee Haniel watched the visuals on the main screen. He saw the crystalline cities, the gentle Selenians with their soft light. Then he saw the craw. He saw the harvesting. His face, worn and lined from 2 decades of service, did not change much, but his jaw tightened slightly. He had seen this before. Different species, different methods, same horror. Origin? He asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. The young officer at the sensor station, Choi Tai-yang, jumped slightly at the sound. His fingers danced over his console. Confirmed, Captain. System is in the fringe, beyond the Helix Treaty borders. No prior human contact. The aggressor species matches profile. Craw Marauder Swarm. A big one. Dr. Kim Ariam, the ship's xenologist, stepped closer to the screen, her eyes wide with a painful mix of professional fascination and deep sadness. They're sending a cultural database alongside the distress call. It's a prayer, Captain. They're praying for salvation. They believe in higher powers. They're asking for angels. From the tactical station, Sergeant Park Min-seo let out a short, quiet breath that wasn't quite a laugh. It was a dry, humorless sound. She was strapped into her reinforced chair, her body always looking ready to move, to fight. Angels, cute. The craw aren't going to be impressed by prayers. She called up tactical overlays. Their defensive capabilities are non-existent. It's a slaughterhouse down there. Lee Haniel leaned back in his command chair. The weight of the decision settled on him. He saw Kim Ariam's hopeful, pleading look. He saw Park Min-seo's grim readiness. He saw Choi Tai-yang's anxious glance, waiting for an order. The Zhongjin was not a warship by primary design, but a deep space response vessel. It was built to be tough, to handle unknowns. It had weapons. His crew had seen action on the frontier. It was never clean, never easy. It always left a mark. A new message appeared on his private screen, decoded from Earth Command. The text was brief. Signal received and analyzed. Proceed to coordinates. Render assistance to indigenous life forms. Assess crawl threat level. Use discretion. Authorization, Gamma 7. Discretion. A word that gave him all the power and all the blame. He could observe and report. He could intervene. He could turn and leave this distant tragedy to its end. He looked back at the main screen. The feed showed a crawl warrior, all chitin and sharp edges, methodically breaking apart a Selenian structure while its occupants huddled inside. Lee Haniel had left people behind before, on a rocky moon against the Skrill, following a bad order. He still heard those voices on bad nights. He was not going to add the soft, singing cries of these people to that chorus. "Officer Choi," he said, his voice final. Plot a jump to the edge of that system. Silent approach. Full tactical readiness. Sergeant Park, prepare your team. We're going in. Dr. Kim, I need everything you can give me on Selenian biology, language, and those city layouts. I want to know where their survivors are clustered. Park Minseo was already standing, a fierce light in her eyes. This was what she and her squad trained for. We'll be ready in 30, Captain. She moved off the bridge, her steps quick and sure. Kim Ariam nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face, followed immediately by a wave of anxiety. Contact with a species under genocide was not in any manual. I'll work on basic communication protocols. Their language is musical. We'll need to be careful. As his crew sprang into motion, Lee Haniel stared at the star chart. They were about to crash a funeral. He knew what they were. They were tired, flawed people in a metal box with guns. They were not angels. But they were all those Selenians were going to get. On the surface, Prelate Valar felt a change. The craw assaults had paused. An eerie quiet fell. Then, a whisper ran through the sanctum. A new light was in the sky. Not the sickly green of craw drogships, but a streak of fire too controlled to be a meteor. Then another, and another. They came from the blackness where stars lived, piercing the smoky veil of the dying world. Valar Eshart, a fragile, three-chambered thing, beat with a painful hope. They had been heard. The prayers had reached the ears of the universe. The great harmony was real. They gathered their people, pointing their delicate fingers to the heavens. "See," they chimed, their voices a soft, bell-like chorus. "They have come. The angels of light are here." The objects fell closer, resolving not into shapes of radiance, but into hard, angular, dark forms. They did not glide. They powered down on violent pillars of superheated exhaust that scorched the beautiful crystal plains below. They hit the ground not with grace, but with a heavy, jarring thud that shook the soil. The hatches did not open with a whisper. They blew open with a hiss of explosive bolts dot, and from within, figures emerged. They were massive, encased in armor the color of night and old blood. Their faces were hidden behind dark, mirrored visors. They moved with a loud, mechanical purpose, the sound of servos and hydraulics cutting through the quiet. They carried weapons that looked like brutal blocks of metal, and they immediately began scanning the horizon, pointing those weapons at the shadows. One of the figures looked toward the crystal sanctum. Its helmet tilted. To Valar, it looked like a predator sizing up prey. This was no being of light and song. This was something forged in noise and fury. A fragile hope in Prelate Valar's chest froze, then shattered into a cold, bottomless dread. The prayer had been answered, but by something utterly, terribly wrong. They had prayed for angels from the heavens, but the demons of earth had appeared. The silence following the demons' landing was the loudest thing Prelate Veller had ever heard. It was a thick, heavy quiet, broken only by the faint hum of the strange machines and the metallic clunk of the armored figures moving. They did not speak, not in any way the Selenians could hear. They communicated with short bursts of blinking light on their shoulders and sharp, electronic clicks. Veller and their people huddled deeper within the sanctum. Their bioluminescence dimmed to the faintest whisper, a survival instinct. They watched through the crystalline walls as the dark forms moved. They were so loud. Every step was a heavy thud. Every turn of their helmet was a whir of machinery. The Selenians flinched with each sound. Then the craw returned. A skittering wave of them, chittering and screeching, poured from a nearby ravine. Their objective was clear. The new arrivals, the unknown factor. Prelate Veller's hope, cold and small, dared to flicker. Perhaps these demons and the craw would destroy each other. The lead armored figure later, the Selenians would learn the name Sergeant Park Minseo, simply raised a fist. The others stopped moving. They became statues. As the first craw warriors charged, their scythe-like arms raised, Minseo's fist dropped. What happened next was not a battle. It was a statement that the humans' weapons did not fire bright, clean bolts of energy. They made a different sound. A harsh, metallic crack, crack, crack that ripped the air apart. The projectiles were invisible, but their effect was not. Craw warriors did not fall gracefully. They were punched backward, pieces of their hard chitin exploding into fragments. Another human raised a heavier tube. There was a deep hump, and a sphere of plasma erupted amid a cluster of craw, vaporizing them instantly, leaving only a glassy crater dot. It was fast. It was brutal. It was utterly, terrifyingly efficient. Within seconds, the craw assault was a mess of twitching limbs and oozing green fluid. The humans advanced, stepping over the remains without a pause. They cleared the area with methodical, overlapping fields of fire, speaking in those short, ugly bursts of digital noise dot to the Selenians. It was a new kind of horror. The craw were a force of nature, a devouring plague. These new creatures, they were a force of industry. They were violence made perfect, made machine. One of the humans stopped near a fallen craw, putting a final shot into its head with a cold, precise motion. The sound was deafening in the new quiet. Prelate Veller felt sick. These were not saviors. They were a different type of storm. On the bridge of the Zhongjin, high above, Captain Lee Haniel watched the tactical feed. Little green dots Sergeant Park's team moved in a tight formation. Red dot scraw contacts winked out in clusters. The numbers on the side of the screen told a clinical story. Enemy force depletion at 87%. Friendly casualties, 0. Perimeter is secure, Captain. Park Minseo's voice came through, crisp and clear over the comms. No hostiles in visual range. The locals are holed up in the big crystal structure. No signs of aggression from them. Acknowledged, Sergeant. Hold position. Dr. Kim is on her way down. Lee Haniel replied. He turned to Dr. Kim Ariam, who was standing by the lift door, wearing a lighter environment suit, her helmet under her arm. Her face was pale. She had been watching the same feed. You saw? Lee Haniel asked, his voice quieter. I saw, she said, her throat tight. We must look like monsters to them. We look like what we are, Lee Haniel said, not unkindly. The only thing that can fight the craw on their own terms. Your job is to make the Selenians understand that. Or at least to not scream when they see us. Kim Ariam nodded, taking a deep breath. She put her helmet on and headed for the shuttle bay down on the surface. Sergeant Park Minseo watched the science shuttle descend. It landed more softly than the assault craft, but still with a jarring thrust of rockets. As the hatch opened, she saw Dr. Kim step out, accompanied by a junior medic. Kim's suit was white and gray, less intimidating than their black combat armor. But she was still a bulky alien figure. Minseo walked over, her heavy boots crunching on the crystalline soil. "Area's clear, Doc, but keep your head on a swivel. Crawl like to tunnel." "Thank you, Sergeant." Kim Ariam's voice sounded in Minseo's helmet speaker. "Have they? Have they tried to communicate?" "They haven't tried anything. They're just hiding, watching." Minseo gestured with her rifle's barrel toward the sanctum. "Good luck." Kim Ariam turned and walked slowly toward the beautiful, fragile-looking crystal structure. She could see shapes moving inside, their soft light pulsing slowly with fear. She stopped a good distance away, knowing she was still a giant to them. She slowly placed her weapon on the ground, then raised her empty hands, palms forward. Inside, Prelate Hazair watched. This demon was different. Its armor was less fearsome. It put its weapon down. The gesture was clear, but the fear was too deep. Valere looked at the other demons, the black ones still standing like statues, their weapons held ready. They were not leaving. This could be a trick. Kim Ariam activated a speaker on her external suit. She spoke slowly, and a device on her wrist translated her words into the complex, tonal chimes of the Selenian language. The sound was synthetic, flat, and wrong, but it was recognizable. "We are friends," the device chimed. "We are from Earth. We are here to help." The words were right, but the voice was a dead thing. It came from a box on a monster's arm. Valere shuddered. They had to respond. They were the prelate. They stepped forward through the shimmering energy barrier of the sanctum entrance. They felt the eyes of their people on them and the dark, unreadable lenses of the demons. Vyler raised their own long, slender hands, mimicking Kim's gesture. They began to speak, their voice a beautiful, fluting song. They offered a traditional greeting of sanctuary, a blessing of safe harbor. Kim Ariam's translator struggled. It caught only pieces. "Welcome? Light to your—" She smiled behind her visor, but the smile couldn't be seen. "Thank you," she said, her translated voice still a flat chime. "We need to make your area safe. My soldiers. We'll check for danger." As she said the word soldiers, two of Park Minseo's team broke their statue stillness and began to move toward the sanctum, their weapons lowered but not slung. Their movements were purposeful, scanning the ground, the walls, the roof. To Valere, it was an invasion. The demons were coming, their heavy feet cracking the delicate walkways. The blessing died on Valere's lips. They took a stumbling step back, their light flickering in panic. A low, fearful murmur rose from the Selenians inside. Kim Ariam saw it all. "Sergeant, stop." She sat on a private channel. "You're scaring them." "They're scared of the dark, Doc," Minseo replied, her team still advancing. "My job is to make sure nothing in the dark eats them." "They'll get used to it." The two soldiers reached the entrance. They loomed over Prelate Valere, who stood frozen. One soldier looked down at the prelate, gave a short, sharp nod that meant nothing to Valere, and then stepped past them into the sanctum, their helmet lights sweeping across the cowering. Luminous faces within. The hope for angels was gone. The reality was this: the crushing sound of boots, the invasive glare of artificial light, and the silent, armored giants walking through the last holy place of a dying people. The demons had not just appeared. They had entered the temple. The inside of the crystal sanctum was a place of soft, shifting colors and gentle, rounded arches. The heavy footsteps of Sergeant Park Minseo's soldier echoed in the space like a hammer hitting a bell. The Selenians pressed themselves against the walls, their light pulsing fast and dim. They were not used to such noise, such sharp, hard angles inside their sacred space. Prelate Valere watched, a deep sadness settling over them. The demon who had put down its weapon, The one called Dr. Kim was speaking again, the flat, chiming words trying to explain. They were checking for danger. They were making things safe. But all Vilaire could see was violation. The soldier moved to a far wall, a beautiful mural depicting the Great Harmony. He reached out with a thick gloved hand and touched a crystal node, checking its stability. A small piece of the delicate crystal flake came off in his grip. A collective flinch went through the Selenians. It was a small thing, but it was a wound. On the Jongjin, Captain Lee Haniel watched the feeds from the soldiers' helmets. He saw the fear. He saw Kim Ariam's efforts falling flat. He also saw Sergeant Minceo's tactical overlay showing several underground tunnels leading toward the sanctum. The Craw were not finished. Sergeant, Lee Haniel's voice came through the comms. We have movement. Subsurface. Converging on your position from the east and north. They're trying to tunnel under the walls. Down below, Minceo immediately snapped into action. Copy that. Choi, give me a sonic map. I want those tunnel paths. She turned to her squad. Jung, Su. Mining charges on the east and north approaches. Set for subsurface shock. We collapse the tunnels before they get close. 2 soldiers broke away, running with a speed that seemed impossible in their heavy armor. They pulled small, blocky devices from their packs. Dr. Kim Ariam heard the orders. She turned to Prelate Vilaire, her translated voice urgent. There is danger coming. Underground. My people will stop it. It will be loud. Do not be afraid. Loud, Valar did not understand the plans, only the word loud. The demons were going to do something else, loud and violent. They huddled their people into the very center of the sanctum, away from the walls. Outside, the soldiers placed the charges. They weren't placing them gently. They punched them into the soft ground with mechanical fists. Charges set. One yelled. Fire in the hole, Minceo said, her voice calm. The ground jumped. It wasn't an explosion on the surface. It was a deep, terrible thunk that came up through the Selenians' feet, a sensation that made their bones vibrate. The crystal of the sanctum sang a sharp, painful note of discord. Dust rained from the ceiling. Then another thump from a different direction. The Selenians cried out, a sound of pure musical terror. On the surface, Minceo watched her scanner. The subsurface red dots vanished. Tunnels collapsed. Threat neutralized. But inside the sanctum, the damage was done. A large, delicate crystal, formation that had grown from the ceiling for 1,000 years, had cracked from the shock. It came crashing down, shattering into 1,000,000 glittering pieces on the floor. It was a masterpiece of natural art, gone. The Selenians stared at the wreckage, their light dimming to a mournful gray. This was the demons' help, breaking their world to save it. Valil looked from the shattered crystal to Kim Ariam. The sorrow in the prelate's large dark eyes was bottomless. Kim wanted to explain about the Craw warriors that would have burst through the floor. She wanted to talk about tactical necessity. But the words seemed useless in the face of that grief. Later, a different problem arose. The main entrance to the sanctum's inner chamber, a beautiful flowing door made of fused crystal, had been damaged in the earlier Craw attacks. It was stuck, sealing a group of Selenians in a side chamber. They were safe, but cut off from food and water. Kim Ariam saw this as a chance. We can help, she chimed to Valere. We can open the door. Valere nodded slowly, hoping for a careful, gentle solution. Perhaps the demons had delicate tools. A human engineer was called. He examined the door. It was jammed in its trek, a large piece of debris wedged behind it. He didn't call for precision cutters. He called for the can opener. He returned with a heavy rifle that had a wide, short barrel. He aimed it not at the door, but at the area where the debris was jammed. Stand clear, his translated voice said, devoid of tone. The Selenians backed away. The engineer fired. A searing, bright blue jet of plasma shot from the barrel, melting. Not just the debris, but a large portion of the wall and the door's mechanism. Molten crystal dripped like tears. The metal of the door glowed red-hot, then white, before slumping. He kicked it, and the once beautiful entrance fell inward with a crash. The engineer slung his weapon. Path is open. He walked away. The Selenians rushed past the smoldering, ruined doorway, reuniting with soft, chiming cries. But the cost was etched in melted stone. Every solution the demons offered was made of fire and brute force. They spoke of safety, but they delivered it wrapped in destruction. That night, under the strange stars, the humans set up their perimeter. They did not sleep in shifts like the Selenians. They stood watch, motionless, or patrolled in a constant, relentless rhythm. Bright lights on tripods flooded the area, turning night into a harsh, shadowless day. The low, constant hum of their generators was the new sound of the world. Prelate Valer sat in their chamber, exhausted. They looked at a small handheld scanner Kim Arium had given them. It showed the area. Little green dots were the demons, constantly moving. The red dots were all gone, for now. The device was a miracle of information. It was also a map of the prison the demons had built around them. Safety felt like a cage made of noise, light, and the lingering smell of ozone and melted stone. A young Selenian, a caretaker of the crystals, approached Villaire. Their light was faint with fear. "Prelate," they chimed softly. "They are fixing things, but they break more than they fix. Are they saving us, or are they just replacing the craw with themselves?" Valere had no answer. They looked out at the dark shape of a human soldier, silhouetted against the artificial lights. The soldier was not looking at the stars or at the beauty of the surviving crystals. The soldier's helmet was tilted down, watching the ground, always watching for threats. They were guardians who seemed to understand only the language of threat and response. They had asked for angels of mercy. They had gotten soldiers of war. And Vilair was starting to understand that in a universe with things like the craw in it, mercy might be a luxury, and soldiers might be the only answer you got. The thought did not bring comfort. It only made the night feel colder. The craw came again at dawn. This was not a probing attack or a tunneling attempt. It was a full, screaming assault from the eastern plains, a dark, chittering tide meant to overrun the last pocket of resistance. Prelate Valar watched from the sanctum, their hearts sinking. The demon soldiers moved quickly, taking positions behind broken walls and crystal formations. Their weapons began to crack and roar. But there were too many craw. The dark tide kept coming, washing closer. On the Jongjin, Captain Lee Haniel saw the numbers on his screen. The red wave was overwhelming the small green dots. Sergeant Park Mincio's voice was tight over the coms. "We are getting pushed back. They're flanking the southern approach. If they get past us, they're in the sanctum." Lee Haniel's mind worked fast. He had one tool left, a weapon of last resort. An orbital kinetic striker, a tungsten rod housed in the Jongjin's belly. It was not precise. It was not surgical. It was simple, brutal physics. He hated using it. "Sergeant, I need your team to fall back to the secondary line. Pull the craw into the kill zone, the open basin east of the sanctum. You have 90 seconds. Down below, Minseo didn't argue. You heard him. Disengage and pull back. Draw them in." Her soldiers began to move, firing as they retreated. The craw, sensing victory, poured forward into the wide, flat basin, a killing ground of glittering crystal dust. Dr. Kim Arium, huddled with Prelate de Vader inside, heard the order on her open comms. She knew what it meant. She turned to Valer, her translated voice desperate. You must tell your people to look away. Close their eyes. Do not look to the east. Now. Valere did not understand, but the raw fear in the flat chime of Kin's voice was clear. They sent out a quick, chiming command. The Selenians turned away, huddling together. Up in orbit, Lee Haniel gave the order. Fire Striker. A silent, heavy mass dropped from the Jongjin. It fell through the atmosphere, a spear thrown by a god. To the Selenians who peeked, they saw a new star, blazing brighter than the sun, falling from the heavens. Then it hit. The light came first. A white flash that painted the inside of the sanctum in sharp, black shadows. Then the sound, a deep, tearing crump that was less a sound and more a physical force, punching the air from their lungs. The ground heaved. The entire crystal sanctum groaned, and new terrible cracks snaked up the walls. A hot, roaring wind blasted past, full of dust and the smell of burned earth. When the rumbling faded, a terrible quiet followed. Valere, trembling, looked east. Where the basin and the advancing Craw army had been, there was now a vast, smoking crater. The horizon itself looked wrong. The demons had called down a star to kill. It was the most terrifying thing Valere had ever witnessed. Their prayers had been for divine light. This was that light's cruel, unforgiving twin. But the battle was not over. Smaller groups of Craw, away from the main strike, were now inside the perimeter, driven by maddened instinct. One group found a breach, a collapsed section of wall near the sanctum's rear. Close to the shelters were the youngest. Selenians were hidden. The sound of chittering and splintering crystal reached the humans. Sergeant Minseo and 2 of her squad were too far away, pinned down. But a lone soldier, Corporal Park, was closer. He was cut off, his leg damaged from a glancing plasma shot. He limped toward the sound, his weapon low on ammunition dot. He saw them. 3 Craw warriors clawing at the makeshift barrier to the shelter. Inside, the soft, frightened glow of Selenian young pulsed like trapped fireflies. Corporal Park didn't call for help. He didn't have time. He opened fire, the last rounds in his magazine taking down 1 Craw. The other 2 turned on him. He fired again. Click. Empty. Pralik Valere, drawn by the noise, watched from a shattered archway. They watched the wounded demon soldier do something impossible. He did not run. He let his empty weapon fall to the ground. Then, with a pained, lurching movement, he put his massive, armored body directly between the Craw claws and the shelter's opening. He raised his metal-covered arms. The Craw fell on him. Scything arms scraped and sparked against his armor. One found a crack, piercing through. The soldier grunted, a human sound of pain, but he shoved forward, knocking 1 Craw back. He was buying seconds with his own body, and a new sound, the rapid crack, crack, crack of a rifle on full auto. Sergeant Minseo had broken through, sprinting across open ground under fire. She slammed into 1 Craw, knocking it off the wounded soldier, and put 3 rounds point-blank into its head. She spun, her movements a blur of controlled fury, and dispatched the last one. She dropped to her knees beside Corporal Park. "Hey, stay with me. Medic is coming." Her voice, usually so hard, was sharp with urgency. She ripped a sealant patch from her belt, pressing it against the breach in his armor, where greenish Craw blood mixed with human red. Valere watched, stunned. The demon leader, the fiercest of them all, was now crouched over her fallen comrade, her hands trying to stop the leaking of his life. Her armor was scorched and cracked. She was not an invincible golem. She was a being hurting, trying to save another. The human medic arrived, and they carefully lifted Corporal Park onto a stretcher. As they carried him past, Valere saw the soldier's face. His helmet had been removed. He was pale, his eyes closed in pain, his features young and human. Not a demon's face. A boy's face. Later, in the medical bay of the Zhongjin, Prelate Valere was led by Dr. Kim Arium. The prelate needed to see. The bay was bright and clean, but it smelled of antiseptic and blood. Humans in medical clothes moved quietly. And there, in cots, were the demons out of their shells. Corporal Park lay sleeping, bandaged. Another soldier had his arm in a cast. They looked vulnerable. Their skin was soft, like Selenian skin, but in different colors. They were not giants. They were just people. Tired, wounded people. Sergeant Minseo stood in a corner, having her own scorched armor removed. A nasty burn was visible on her shoulder. She did not flinch as it was treated. She just stared at the floor, her face etched with a deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. Captain Lee Hanyul entered. He saw Valere. He walked over, moving slowly. He too looked old in that moment, the weight of the day pressing down on him. "Your soldier," Valere chimed, Kim translating softly. He stood before the claws. He had no more violence. So he used himself. Lee Hanyul nodded. He looked at the wounded in the room. "It's all we have, prelate. In the end, we don't have magic. We don't have light from heaven. We have this." He gestured to the people in the bay, the wounded, the healers, the tired sergeant. "We have each other, and we have the will to stand between the monsters and those who can't fight, even if all we can do is stand there." He looked back at Valere, his eyes clear and terribly honest. "We fight like demons because the universe has real ones. And sometimes the only thing that can stop a devil is a rougher, angrier devil." Valere looked from the captain's tired face to the wounded corporal to the stoic sergeant. The shattered crystal, the melted door, the crater on the horizon, they were the marks of devils, yes. But the soldier using his body as a shield, the leader running into fire to save him, the doctor working to heal them. These were not the acts of demons. They were the acts of beings who cared. Violently, messily, imperfectly, but truly, the prayer for angels had been wrong. Angels might have brought peace. These creatures brought something else, a choice. They would use hellfire, but they would stand in the blaze for you. It was not what Valere had wanted, but it was perhaps what they needed. The realization was not warm. It was heavy and solid and real, like the weight of a stone in their hand. The silence after the great impact was different now. It was not the quiet of fear, but the quiet of exhaustion. The craw on the surface were gone, crushed or vaporized. But Captain Lee Hanyul knew the war was not won. The craw command ship, a fat, ugly vessel hanging in high orbit like a poisonous fruit, was the source. It directed the swarms. It would send more. As long as it lived, the Selenians were not safe. On the surface, the humans worked quickly. They helped clear debris, their movements still efficient, but slightly less sharp. The sight of their wounded had changed something. The Selenians no longer flinched at every sound. They watched, their soft light showing patterns of confusion and slow, dawning understanding. Sergeant Park Minseo stood before Lee Hanyul in the makeshift command tent, her arm in a sling under her uniform. Her face was set. "The boarding action is the only way, Captain. A direct missile strike might not penetrate their central hive. We need to get inside, plant charges in the reactor core, and get out." "It's a suicide run, Sergeant," Lee Hanyul said, his voice low. "It's the mission," she replied simply. "My team is ready. What's left of it?" She had lost 2 soldiers in the last assault. Their names hung in the air between them. Dr. Kim Arium entered, Prelate Valere beside her. "Captain," Kim said, "the prelate wishes to speak." Valere looked at the humans, at their tired faces and bandaged limbs. They began to speak, their chimes soft and musical. Kim translated, her own voice gentle. Prelate Valer says, "They have seen the cost. They understand now that your power is not without limit. It is bought with pain. They offer a blessing for the journey, not to angels of light, but to brave, wrathful hearts." Minseo gave a single, sharp nod. Li Hanyul bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Prelate." The plan was set. The Zhongjin, battered but still functional, would make a high-speed pass near the Crawl command ship. During the pass, Sergeant Minseo and a volunteer team would launch in a single, armored boarding pod a metal capsule designed to punch through an enemy hull. It was a violent, dangerous way to travel. Down in the launch bay, Minseo checked her squad. 4 others, including the medic who had patched her up. They wore lighter, more flexible armor for close-quarters fighting. Their faces were grim. Choi Taiyang's voice came over the ship-wide comm, trembling slightly but clear. "Boarding pod launch sequence is ready." "Good luck." The Zhongjin shuddered as it accelerated, drawing fire from the crawl ship. On the bridge, Li Hanyul gripped his chair. "Steady, steady. Launch the pod." With a thunderous blast of compressed air, the pod shot away from the Zhongjin, a tiny, fast-moving spear aimed at the belly of the beast. Inside, the humans were thrown around in their harnesses. Minseo gritted her teeth. Brace for impact. The pod hit the Craw ship's hull. There was a scream of tearing metal, a sound that vibrated through their bones. The front of the pod was a giant drill, and it chewed its way in, then blasted open. The humans stumbled out into the dripping organic darkness of the Craw vessel. The air was thick and hot, smelling of acid and decay. This was a different kind of hell. The corridors were tunnels of pulsating, wet chitin. Craw warriors, alerted, swarmed them from the shadows. The fighting here was intimate and horrific. No long-range shots. It was muzzle flashes in the dark, the crunch of armor against chitin, shouted warnings, and the wet sounds of close kills. Minseo led from the front, her good arm swinging a powered blade that cut through Craw limbs. They fought for every meter, following the schematics Choi Taiyang had guessed at from scans. Heading deeper into the ship's hot, throbbing heart, on the surface, Prelate Valer and their people gathered in the sanctum. They did not pray to their old gods. Instead, they turned their gentle light outward, toward the sky, where the tiny, brave dots of human ships danced with the larger, evil shadow. They sent out a song, not of pleading, but of witness. A song that said, "We see you." On the Zhongjin, the weight was agony. Li Hanyul watched the static-filled audio feed from Minseo's team. He heard panting, gunfire, curses, and the terrible shrieks of the Craw. Then, Minseo's voice, strained, reactor core sighted. Planting charges. Timer set for 5 minutes. "We're heading back." The return was worse. The Craw were everywhere now, an entire hive aware of the infection in its heart. The human team ran, fought, and stumbled. One soldier fell, grabbed by a Craw and dragged into a side tunnel. His screams were cut short. They couldn't go back for him. Minseo's face, seen through her helmet cam, was a mask of rage and grief. They reached the ragged hole their pod had made. The pod itself was destroyed, surrounded by Craw. There was no way out the way they came. "Captain," Minseo gasped, leaning against a wall. "We're at the breach. No exit. We'll hold here." Li Hanyul's mind raced. "Sergeant, get to the outer hall. The Zhongjin will make another pass. We'll pick you up. You'll get shredded." "That's my problem. Move." Minseo didn't argue. She led her 3 remaining soldiers, cutting and shooting their way, not inward, but toward the ship's outer skin. They used their last explosives to blow a hole, the cold vacuum of space screaming in. They clung to the jagged edge of the hole, the infinite blackness below them, the crawl ship's weapons firing at the approaching Zhongjin. The Zhongjin came in, a wounded bird refusing to fall. Its shields glowed under green craw plasma fire. It slowed, just for a second, aligning its main cargo bay door with the tiny figures clinging to the hull. Now! Li Hanyul yelled "Min ECO," and her soldiers pushed off, floating across the short, deadly gap of space. One soldier's boot caught the edge of the bay door, and he tumbled in. The medic followed. Minseo grabbed a handhold, pulling herself in. She turned, looking back for her last soldier. He was floating off course. A piece of debris from the Zhongjin's hull spun and hit him, sending him drifting away into the dark. Minseo reached out a hand, a silent scream on her face, but he was gone. The cargo bay doors slammed shut. "Go, go, go!" Li Hanyul shouted. The Zhongjin veered away as the timer on the crawl reactor hit 0. The crawl command ship did not explode in a fiery ball. It imploded, then burst apart in a spectacular silent fountain of molten debris and dying organic matter. The sky above the Selenian world was suddenly clean dot in the cargo bay. Sergeant Minseo sank to her knees, her helmet off, her shoulders shaking with silent, heaving breaths that were not quite sobs. She had left too many behind. Weeks later, the Zhongjin was repaired enough to leave. The Selenian world was healing, the Craw Scourge gone. At the landing site, Prelate Velair stood before Captain Li Hanyul, Dr. Kim Ariam, and a solemn Sergeant Minseo. Velair spoke, their chimes translated by Kim for the last time. "You came to us as demons. You broke our walls and shook our ground. You called down falling stars. We prayed for angels of mercy. You were angels of wrath. We did not understand that in a dark universe, wrath can be the purest form of mercy." They bowed their head low. "We will tell our children of the demons from Earth, who burned themselves in hellfire so we could keep our light. Your hellfire is a gift we can never repay." Captain Li Hanyul bowed in return. "Your light was worth the fight." As the Zhongjin lifted off, its engines a gentle rumble compared to its first violent arrival, Sergeant Park Minseo stood at a viewport. She looked down at the glittering, recovering crystal world. The scars of their battle were still there, the crater, the burned zones. But among them, she could see new, soft lights beginning to glow. She did not smile, but the hard line of her mouth softened, just a little. The job was done. The demons were going home. And somewhere below, the people who prayed for angels would forever remember the day they were saved by something much, much stronger.